Interviewing for coding professionals. Let's get started with that. We're going to talk about the hiring process, what you might want to or expect from the hiring process, how to prepare for the interview, before the interview, what to do during the interview, and then what to do after the interview. So that's how I've laid out the presentation. Then we'll talk about the questions that you'll actually be asked in the main technical interview and some of the more difficult ones, and start practicing how to respond to them. And then I've got a couple of notes from local employers about their hiring practices specifically, which probably apply mostly across the board, but wanted to make sure that you're hearing from people locally. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. I'm pretty sure we will. So congratulations. Everything you did before with your resume and cover letter and networking worked, and now you have an interview. But now's when things get scary, right? So this right here is a mind map, which reminded me that I needed to share some mind mapping information with you guys. The mind mapping is pulling out ideas and concepts into smaller parts and breaking them down even further. So in preparing for the interview, these are all types of things that you can do. The why part at the top, why am I applying for this job? Which means I'm going to research the company. Why should I work here? What's their mission? What's their company culture? Am I a good fit? Which will help you draft questions and show your interest in the company. And then the other part of the why is why you. So those are two different branches of the why. What makes you a good candidate? What are your qualifications, your training and experience? So this is an example of a mind map you could do prior to your interview, just to sort of help you prepare. Looking at the where, making sure you're showing up on time. Where is it? Am I going to have to commute to get to it? I've seen people, I myself actually almost missed a very important interview for myself because I went to the wrong location. So it's very important that it seems simple, but this is something that you should do, especially for those jobs that you really want. And if it's not on Zoom, of course. And then the what is the position? What's that description? What's your career path? How does this job going to fit in that? Because if they ask you during the interview, what are you trying to accomplish long term? You want to have an answer for how this job is going to fit into that, and not be caught off guard. And then to the left-hand side here, when, again, to be reliable and on time, make sure you have the date right. I've seen people show up the wrong day for interviews. Make sure you're dressed for it. If you can go on social media, see how people dress. Obviously, you can always err on the side of business casual. That's almost a never fail. And then showing enthusiasm when you do show up. So anyway, example of a mind map and how you could use this for preparing for an interview. And you could add other pieces. Practice would be a good one. Building confidence, you could add other pieces to this as well. So the hiring process, our local employers say that you can pretty much guarantee you're going to have more than one interview. Typically, you're going to start with a recruiter or an HR person who's going to pre-screen you. And those people are just looking to see if you're human, you are employable, and if you really have interest in this position. So they're looking to see if you are good at conversation, how you answer the phone. If you are applying for jobs, make sure that every time you answer the phone, you are answering it professionally and that you are answering with a smile, because you never know when that HR person is just calling you off guard just to see how you are on a regular day. They want to know if you can just have a conversation. So if you are busy and you're in the middle of something else, or it's not a good time, the best thing to do would be to tell them, this isn't a good time. Can we talk another time? If they're trying to talk to you right then, they may call you or email you or something to schedule it, or they might just call you. And then to see if you have real interest in the position, you're going to want to have remembered that you applied to them, and what they do. So that's another reason why you want to keep that tracking sheet of the places that you applied. Then they're going to schedule an initial call with you. And this is just the general flow. Sometimes they might not have a pre-screening. You might go right into initial call. You might go right into a full-blown interview if you've networked and they feel confident having you pass these other parts. So in the next call, where you're probably talking to an actual hiring manager, they're probably looking for your basic minimum requirements and seeing if they already know you're human, but they're going to continue to see if there's a good fit, continue to see if you're still reliable and dependable. A lot of companies have multiple interviews just to see if every single time you show up on time. It's easy sometimes for someone to do it once, but getting someone to do it multiple times is not always as easy. So on this one, they're usually just wanting to see what kind of skills you have and if you are eligible to go another step further and talk to somebody whose time is a little bit more important. So when you get to that point, that's when they're really evaluating you. And this call might be with other team members, other engineers. They might be seeing how you fit with the people who are working on the projects you'll be working on, or it could be with the owner of the company, depending on the size of the company. And in this interview, this is the technical interview where they're looking to see what your aptitude is, what your attitude is like, how you attack things, and then what your fit is still. They're looking for that the whole way along. So we're going to focus most of the rest of this conversation on the technical interviews because you can pretty much answer the phone, tell them about your basic background, get yourself to the technical interview, but here's where things get challenging and nerve-wracking and all the other good stuff. So they're generally going to ask a lot of programming questions when you get to this point, because now they're trying to see, if we hire you, can you do the work? So you can also assume that there will be a test at some point, whether it is a practical, which is something that they're going to give you a quiz or something to take home and actually do, or if they're going to do a live test, which they might sit and actually watch you do it. They might give it to you and leave the room and come back. But you always want to assume that they are watching you. and if it's live, that's what's really considered a whiteboard test. So they're going to be watching you to see what your thought process is and how you go through solving the problem that they give you. You also want to consider that you might not be interviewed by a human being. Some technical engineers are robots, so they might not seem as human as you are normally used to, but you don't want that to throw you off track. Just know that they can be very straight-laced, straight-faced, seem kind of serious, but that may just be part of the demeanor of the person, and don't take it personally. Just do the best that you can. And also know that they are not expecting everyone to come up with the same answer or even an answer at all. They may be expecting a completely different response from a junior level person than a senior level person. And we will get more into details of that. So before the interview, so they've probably called, they've scheduled an interview with you, when you have that next in-person meeting or Zoom meeting, you want to try to talk to somebody at the company. We've talked about this before in networking. If you can talk to someone who can tell you a little bit about the hiring process, the HR person, there's nothing wrong with calling a company and saying, I would like to know what's coming. Am I going to have a test? What should I be prepared for? They will probably appreciate that you're trying to do that. So it's not cheating. You're not trying to get ahead or anything. You just want to know, what should I expect? So you can be ready for it. So you can try to talk to an HR person. You can talk to another employee, ask them, what was the hiring process like for you? What tips do you have? What should I expect? And you can also try to talk to the hiring manager, which might be trickier, but probably the easiest way is to call the company and say, I have an interview coming up on X day for this position. Is it possible to talk to the hiring manager or someone else who can tell me what to expect in the interview or who I'll be talking to? It's also helpful to know if you're talking to many people, if you're just having that interview with one person. If you know you're having it with one specific person, you can look them up on LinkedIn. Then you will be able to show up and say, look, I have some questions to ask you about things I saw on your LinkedIn, which means you researched the company and did your homework. So you definitely want to research the company. You want to look at not just their website, but their news that might come out about them, their social media. If they just won a big contract or an award or something, you want to be able to say, I saw that you got this, congratulations. What else is in the future for this company that I might expect to be a part of or something, so that they will know that you looked them up and are interested. That really helps them understand that you are interested in this job, whereas 80% of the other people are just trying to get a job and they don't ever look up even what the company does. I know personally, when people apply to work with me and I ask them, what do you know about what I do? And they haven't even looked at my website, 0 chance of them working with me. Absolutely none. You also want to practice the tough questions that we're going to talk about and lots of other coding questions, but you don't necessarily need to memorize your responses. If you try to memorize stuff, anytime you get tripped up, you're going to Like right now, I'm not memorizing, I promise. But when you get stuck, you won't be able to improvise and move forward. You get much more deer in the headlights and worried about what you were supposed to say versus what you can pick up and move forward with. You want to practice algorithms from the research I've done. So just also side note, I have never been on an actual coding interview. So any questions that you have, I'm going to do my best to answer, but we may be putting some of those off and having someone else answer for us later. But from my research, you are likely to get lots of algorithm questions. So you want to do some practice and homework on those. And these are some sites that I found that you can do that. I can share them in Slack later if you like, but you also will have access to this presentation, or you can write them down right now. And then you want to practice the whiteboarding questions. So if you can do this with a friend or record yourself or do something just to see how you're doing it, I would also suggest getting on Google and looking up how to pass a coding interview. There are hundreds of websites, blog articles, people who've been through boot camps who are sharing their experience, and lots of different practices and places where you can go on YouTube and watch people answer questions on a whiteboard and see how it's done. So during the interview still, look like you put some effort into, or now we're moving into the actual interview, look like you put some effort into it. And by that, I mean, especially on Zoom, you don't want to show up like you just rolled out of bed. You still want to try to make sure the lighting is good, that you are in a good, quiet space. Just because you have a meeting on Zoom isn't well, meetings are maybe okay, but when you have an interview, you need to do everything in your power to get the kids in daycare or in the next room or do whatever you can to be professional. This is your shot. And it's, get the neighbors to help out if you have to. Like, you want to come off like you're going to show up to work without any problems, but if you can't even make it to the interview without clearing the way, that may show up as a red flag for them. I always encourage people to bring something to write on. When you are asked questions and you don't know the answers, the best thing you can do is write it down. That shows them that you're a person who on the job, when you don't know something, you're going to go look it up. So instead of sitting there and saying, well, I don't know the answer to that, or I'm not sure, you can say, I'm not sure about that, but you know what, I'm going to write it down. I'll look up later. And even if you don't say that out loud, they'll see you doing it. So you want to be able to do that. Sometimes I've seen in interviews, they'll say the interviewers will actually throw the interviewee a bone and say, oh, you know what would be a good thing for you to do or try? And they'll throw out a reference or a name. And there's so many people who have nothing to even write it down on. And so that tip that they got is lost. So you want to have paper or something to write on. You also want to have copies of your resume. So if it's in person, bring them with you. Offer them. If they don't ask, you still offer them. It shows that you're helpful, that you planned ahead, and there may be somebody in the room who doesn't have a copy, and then you've automatically won some points with them. So you want to make sure that you're just demonstrating that you are a resourceful and team player by thinking of other people. And if it's on Zoom, you can still do the same thing and say, if anybody needs a copy of my resume, I can pop a link into the chat or email it to you right now or whatever. Same thing with references. If they don't ask for references, still bring them, still offer them. So you guys want to make sure that you have gone out and asked some people, at least 3 people, to be references for you, who are people who are on standby that know that at some point you are looking for a job and that they might get a call or an email about it. And you want those to be people you can be that are reliable to answer the phone and speak on your behalf. So during the interview, you also want to be honest and be yourself. And by being honest, I don't mean you need to word vomit all of your history and everything in the world. They don't need to know everything about you. You can stick to the questions, stay focused, but you don't have to worry about trying to be somebody who you're not. You don't have to try to be impressing them. They just want to see who you are and what you're capable of. When you're asked questions, it's a very good practice to repeat the question back and then answer it. So if they ask you, what is your biggest strength? You start with, well, my biggest strength is, or I think my biggest strength is, and that gives you a few seconds to get your brain caught up with your answer, but also just make sure you're answering the question that they asked you. And also, if you don't know the question, ask them for clarification, ask them to reword it, especially when you get to the coding questions. If they've asked you something that you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, don't try to fumble your way through it. Ask them I don't really know what you're asking. Can you ask me a different way? In most cases, they know you're nervous. And if there's something like, you don't have to feel stupid because you couldn't answer the question the way they asked it. And ask good questions. Never, never, never leave an interview without asking them something. So at the end of the resume interview, they're going to ask you, do you have any questions for us? And 90% of the time, people will say, which means I never even thought about this. No, I don't think so. That is a red flag also. That means you did not show any previous interest in getting this job. You didn't spend any time researching. You didn't bother thinking of some questions ahead of time. So you will stand out from most people if you have some good questions to ask. So on that paper that you brought, you might also have some questions on there. Already have it prepared. Ask them, and if they've answered it already, you can skip it. But if you want to ask them about, do they have a training program? Am I going to have a mentor? Do you have senior development? Where do you see the future for this position? They want to see that you are looking for a career, that you're planning to stay for a long time, and that you want to see how you fit and how it will grow. So any questions you have around those things, ask them. In my opinion, you need to be interviewing them. If you didn't see a lot of diversity and inclusion stuff on their website, start asking them questions. What kind of opportunities do I have to get involved outside of my position? Are there committees that I can join? And that will show too that you have interest not only in doing your job, but being part of the company. Okay, are there any questions at this point? Because we're going to start talking about testing and questions that will be asked during the interview.
I actually do have one. About asking them a question. Is it rude to ask them like what's their future goals for the company later on?
Not
Like,
at all.
okay.
I think that is a great question
I
because
didn't
if
want to
they
come
can't
off as
answer
like
that
rude if I
question,
did, yeah.
yeah, if they can't answer the question, that's a red flag for you.
Okay, yeah.
Now they might not be the right people who know, so it's possible that you're interviewing with, somebody who's a middle manager and isn't privy to that information. So you want to be cognizant of who you're asking the question to, and what their response might be. But yeah, perfectly valid.
Thank
Brandy,
you.
I see you have your hand up.
Yes, with diversity and inclusion, like asking that question, there's a few companies that I've looked at, like they're great and everything, award winning. They have diversity, inclusion in big bold letters all over their mission statement. But when you look at like their photos and their social media and their spotlight, there's not any POCs
Right.
anywhere. So how do you go about professionally asking about like diversity within a company that praises it so much, but it's not seen?
Yeah, that's tricky, especially I obviously have a different background and I don't know, not point of view, but um, vulnerability in asking that question. So for me, I want all of you to be in a position where when you go into interview, you're interviewing them. So you should be able to ask them if that's a concern you really have, and I would have, then you should be able to say, with all due respect, I did do research on your website. I see a lot of, I'm really happy to see, always cut people flattery, right? I'm really happy to see that you say you have these initiatives, but I'm not really seeing it in your social media. And, so maybe can you give me some statistics? Are there other people of color who work here? Like, what is your diversity? Is there a committee? How can I get involved? If you do need help in that area, can I get involved in it? And if they can't answer that question or they don't like their answer, get a job somewhere else. But I think you should ask. I don't think you should wait to get on the job and then say, well, where's all this stuff you talked about?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And it might be tough and uncomfortable, but I would ask. And it's hard too because in tech companies, it's predominantly young white males, and they are, if it's a good company, the response is going to be, we're trying to fix that. We're hoping you'll join our team. We're hoping you'll get involved, all of that good stuff. But, if you don't like what they respond with, then there's your answer.
It has to be for real.
Yeah.
Not just a face they put out because that's,
Yeah. And the
whatever.
reality is you might be one of the first that they're bringing to the table, but you want to know, if I'm the first person in, are you going to listen to my suggestions? Are you going to help us bring more people like me in? Or am I it? Am I your token Black person? Or are we actually trying to bring in real diversity, right?
That's a really good question, Brandy. Glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Any other questions at this point? And Mel, I assume that's you on the call there. All right, let me go back to this. Okay, so as I said, during the whiteboarding exercise, they may be watching you or they might leave. It may not even be on whiteboard. Maybe they'll give you something on paper or something. The recommendation is to draft it out, kind of sketch out your whole thought process before you start drawing in front of people. And then try to explain your thought process. You can either do it at the end and summarize what you've done, or some people say that they like to kind of talk out loud. So kind of up to you. You want to also, if you're solving a problem that has multiple solutions, you want to say to them, or at the end when you're summarizing, talk about the different ways you could see it being done, so that they, again, you're not trying to get to any one right answer. It may not even be solvable, the thing that they give you. You just want to show them how you're attacking the problem. And if you see that you could do it this way, or you could handle it with different keywords, you want to just show them that you understand that there's different ways to do it. Then summarize when you're finished, talk about those different things, why you chose the way that you did it, but understanding that there's different ways. When you go, and like I said, I suggest watching some videos from people who've done boot camps and how they or just have gone through the interviews and how they describe how to do it, to really see what that looks like in real life, and to get kind of comfortable with it, and then to practice some yourself. And then after the interview, you need to follow up, obviously, but what you want to do is follow up with your best writing. I think I copied this from somewhere. I don't know what best writing means. I guess it means spelling and grammar. You need to thank them. You want to show them how excited you are for the interview as soon as possible. So if you leave the interview and you have access to someone's email or LinkedIn, send them a message within the hour. Just right away. I'm so glad that you guys, took the time to interview me today. I'm excited for this opportunity. I hope that we'll talk again soon. And then you can follow up also with a handwritten note. You really want to stand out at this point, because at this point they're interviewing people and they are, so yes, Carolyn, your best handwriting, if you're doing handwriting, so that maybe that is what it was. But yeah, you want to do as quick as you can, email if possible, and then follow up with something handwritten would be my suggestion, because they have talked to, interviewed several people. They probably have a couple people that they're teetering between, and if the one who shows up and says, I really want this job, is the one they're going to give it to. So make sure also that your LinkedIn and your social media are looking good, because they're at the same time going to be looking at your social media again to remember who you were and see who they're going to go forward with. The other thing you want to do is take a moment to write down what you learned and what you don't want to repeat the following time. So if there was a question that you struggled with, something you couldn't answer, something you did wrong during the whiteboard testing, you don't want to repeat the same thing on the next interview. So make sure you're stopping and practicing a challenging question, or Googling and figuring out how to, if they asked you a question you couldn't answer at all, go look it up and make sure you figure out how to solve it, because you have your paper where you were writing stuff down you didn't know. So this point, I want to have you guys do a little bit of work, and I'm going to put up a challenging question and then give you 3 minutes to write down your answers, or what you think you might answer. And then we'll talk about if there's part of that question that you think you should do different, or you want to ask me if this is the right way to answer that question or whatever. So I think this is the best way to get started on this. So the first one is just tell us about yourself. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to start writing down how you would answer if I said, so Brandy, tell me a little bit about yourself. So the next one is, what is your biggest weakness? I don't think you need 3 minutes for that, so we'll just do 2. And I will say with this one, they're not typically looking for just a response. So if your inclination is to say, oh, my biggest weakness is chocolate, they're looking for a little bit of elaboration on what your weakness is, what you've been doing about it, how you're going to ensure that that weakness doesn't affect your ability to do the job. They also don't want you to go to something as easy as chocolate.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course, Shaw.
So these questions, do you customize them according to the positions, like for the sprint? So let's say if there is a position that you're applying for, and it's, I mean, the requirement is to have some leadership or management experience or skills. So do you list those, mention those as well? That's specific, let's say leadership or managing teams.
So are you asking if you were applying for a position with like a higher level of leadership or management, would you answer the question differently?
Exactly, kind of, and yeah, just as an example, yeah.
Yeah, and when you're applying for sort of, so I've gauged these as well as sort of maybe not entry level, but for the questions I expect that you would be asked at this level. If you were applying for something a little bit higher, they may not ask you these same types of questions either. So yeah, but I would expect, kind of like I said earlier, even in the coding questions, I'm going to expect different answers from a junior person than I am from a more seasoned senior person, I think.
Thank you.
Because it's just based on your experience, right? Like if you're just starting your position, you may not have had a chance to really dive into what your strengths are so much. But when you've been working a long time, you should probably have an idea of what, you know, you're really good at and what you're going to bring to the table.
Thanks.
And Caroline, I like what you messaged me, that your strength and your weaknesses can be the same, which is definitely often true. Okay, great. Again, we're going to practice these. I just wanted to introduce you to them. Now let's talk about some of the questions that are going to come up. Why are you changing your screen? Hold on. So I did not do this in the same way. I'm just throwing this out here. So the types of coding questions you're probably going to get are conceptual ones that want to know if you understand the core concepts of the languages and the frameworks that you're learning. The other ones are going to be around systems design, and that's looking for, instead of diving into solving the problem without understanding the environment, if you're stopping to ask the questions you need to know to come up with the right solution. So if you need to know how many people will be using the solution, or how much traffic they expect, or I don't even know. You guys are the ones here who should be able to start asking these types of questions. But they're looking for, are you stopping to get the right requirements before you move on to solving the problem? And then the data structure and algorithm problems are kind of the 3 main types. And I'm going to add to the micro actions and the homework for you guys to go out and do some research and sort of look up the types of questions. So there's some samples here on the kinds of things that they might ask you. Oops, sorry. And there's no way to know in advance, you know, this is random. It's not likely that these specific questions are going to show up, but you want to have tested some that are kind of around the same types of questions. And there, like I said, there are lots of test banks online and stuff that you can go in and just sort of work through a little bit. And the mock interviews that we're going to do are hopefully going to be helpful in that way as well. So some of these questions are, how do you find duplicate numbers in a integer array? How do you print the first non-repeated character? So they just want to see how you're going to work through that. And so take a look at these. Think about as you're learning the coursework, if someone asked you, and as you're doing it, if someone asked you, how would I do this? How would you sit down and walk through that while someone is watching you? And you just might want to do some practice of these things and see if you can talk your way through them. And maybe you can meet with your mentor as well to kind of do some practice whiteboarding exercises from interviews, and maybe they can ask you some questions that they've actually been asked before. And we're getting towards the end. So one thing that I did know, I asked some of the other people in Careers and Code to give me some additional information for this presentation. And Sean Burdick shared from the one that he did, there's a difference between working in a large company and a small company. If you're going into a large company, you're likely going to have a job, and you're going to be, if your job is writing code, your job is writing code. And if your job is databases, you're working in databases. But in a smaller company, you are more likely to wear more hats. Like he says, you're going to be the person, they're going to ask you more questions in the interview about a lot broader types of things. So I just want you to be aware of that and to be expecting it. They may not focus on coding questions. Some of these companies might not ask you a single coding question. You're not going to know until you get in the interview, or if you've been able to call and talk to somebody ahead of time and ask them what to expect. So now just some of the things that we heard from the employers in the survey that we asked, the things that they're looking for. Number one, every single one of them said we're looking for cultural fit. So that's not coding ability. That's what they want first, is the right person for the company and for the role. They want someone who's willing to learn. So when you are walking through those exercises, if you get to a point where you don't know what you're supposed to do next, you could stop and say, I'm stuck. Like, maybe you can point me in the right direction. And I've been in interviews before, even with myself, when I've been asked a question and I'm kind of like, huh? And then somebody will give me a little hint. So you're not obviously going to want to be asking for that all the time, but there may be points where you're kind of like, maybe I need some help getting to the next step. And they want you to be honest about what you don't know. So they want you to be confident in what you do know, but if you don't know something, they want you to say it rather than try to pretend like you know it. They want people who are goal-oriented. So this, what we talked about earlier about asking about where this company is going to be in the future, that's something that they would probably like to hear if their concern is about you being goal-oriented and that you are also ready to be at the company for a while. They want problem solvers, team-oriented people. And so even as you're talking through the questions, maybe if you get to a point where you couldn't go further, here's where you could make a joke and say, here's where I'd go ask my mentor what I'm supposed to do next. Or get on Google and start searching, because I know that's how I got through lots of code when I was doing this before. They want dependable people. So get good with your reminders. You do not want to be late on your first job and ever, but especially not in your interviews or your first days. They want people who are adaptable, especially in those smaller companies where you may have to do different things on different days. And they really want you to have an understanding of the context of the work. So they don't want you to be a trained monkey who is just following directions and doing work for work's sake. Everything that they have said is that they want a person who's going to be part of the team, part of working on solving the problem and giving their input and feedback, which is why you need to be a good fit and to be at a company that you are excited to be at, so that you'll be that best version of that employee. So what we asked them about, what examples do you have of people who have wowed you in the past? And it's back to that thank you message. And this one was very specific about what you should include in that message. They wanted to know what you had learned about the position, the company, and the team. So if you can mention in your handwritten letter or the email follow-up how great the interview was, you learned a little bit more about what they do, and you're even more excited to work there, and that will earn you some more points. They want to see that you're using GitHub. So you want to have, you'll have your projects for Careers and Code on there, but if you can do any side projects or even after Careers and Code, continue to use that as a place to build your portfolio. Again, continuing to see that passion for the work and people who are looking for a career and not just to have a job. And that's it. So any more questions lingering at this point? Okay, hearing none. So let's see. This is me. You know where to find me.